Let me take just a couple of minutes to do a quick introductions. We have with us tonight Doug Wood, who is one of 2 instructors in the Hawkins County school system. Doug teaches fire science at Cherokee High School, and he's retired from fire department down in Florida. Doug, welcome to the discussion. We also have with us Chief Fugate, the fire chief at the Goshen Valley Volunteer Fire Department, and he has a very important role in safety out at the ammunition plant. We also have with us for the first time tonight, Chief Shane Ray, president of the National Fire Sprinkler Association, and also a Tennessee fire chief, and our lead lecturer, Chief Bruce Varner, and myself. And with that, Bruce, we're going to let you take over, and this recording will be posted on YouTube and shared with a lot of other folks. Bruce, the show is all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And Shane and I had actually talked in Washington the other night, and I was going to get Shane to kind of lead off and talk about things that are particular to the state of Tennessee.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say that a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in a little rural area outside of Nashville in Cheatham County. So we're a small county. At the time we had 8 volunteer fire departments. 3 of those fire departments were city fire departments. The other 5 were volunteer departments. And so way back in the late 80s and early 90s, we came through and started and decided that we needed a county fire association. And we put that together so the chiefs could meet once a month and the firefighters and everybody could get together so we could talk about common causes. By 1995, we had written a plan for the county that said, how can we lower ISO? How can we combine joint trainings? How can we utilize the state fire academy resources that would come to us? And back then, Tennessee's resources were not mobile at all. They wouldn't hardly come out to teach training classes. You had to go to them, and they're a lot better at that now, I believe. And so, but with that plan in 1995, we changed it again in 2000, built on it again. After that, in several years, I was the volunteer fire chief in Pleasant View from 1998 until 2010. So I spent several years there as a volunteer fire chief, was very active in the Tennessee Fire Chiefs Association on the legislative front. And so we did a lot of things with training. We got the county to start giving donations out of general fund. At first, the county set up an emergency services committee that dealt with things like volunteer fire services and EMS. And I'm proud to say that Cheatham County now is one of the few counties that has a countywide fire tax. So they have fire tax districts, which is allowable under state law in the state of Tennessee. And that funding now provides a significant amount of resources to the fire service in that county. So now there's only 5 fire departments left in that county from consolidation. Some just went bankrupt and closed down, but we all picked up their districts. So the county still has an emergency service committee. It manages the county fire tax districts, and then the county fire chief / emergency manager reports to that group, as does all the volunteer fire chiefs. And then now 3 out of those 5 fire chiefs are paid fire chiefs, and some have a variety of paid staff or volunteer staff. They're all still combination fire departments, but they at least all have some form of paid people. And that's, again, a small county of only 35,000 people. So just to give you, and that was, my background and how we done things such as buy turnout gear. We leveraged our resources to buy fire trucks. And then once the grants program come out in 2000, naturally we all started applying for grants. And it's safe to say that every fire department in that county has had multiple grants. Many of them have had some form between once they split the grants up in, I believe, 2005, where you had to apply for operations, prevention, and then safer, which we wrote originally in the grants program, but it was a few years before it was funded after 9/11. but it's safe to say that every one of them, some fire departments there have had a grant of one of those three levels of grants every year since the grant program started. So it's been amazing for me to watch it back in the day when we had to go buy our own turnout gear. When I started in 1984 to now, it's an amazing to watch that system and how progressive it's been and how much it is. And still a little old rural county, but it's certainly now growing very fast. And one of the other things they did that was unique in the county is the first county in the state to adopt a fire sprinkler requirement. So any new major subdivision, and a major subdivision in that county is considered more than 3 homes, has been since 2005 protected with fire sprinklers. So for example, the town of Aspen City, we estimate that 42% of that whole town is now protected with fire sprinklers. In the little city of Pleasant View, Tennessee, we estimate that over 70% of all the houses in that community are protected with fire sprinklers. So, and again, they still operate robust volunteer fire departments. So thank you. Thanks for letting me hang out with you guys.
Chief, what's the population of Cheatham County?
It's about 35,000, I believe.
What do you have for industry there?
The only industry there besides agriculture is state water heaters. So your water heater in your house now, that used to be State Industries. Now it's A.O. Smith. That's in Aspen City.
Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Thank y'all.
Shane, are there any programs at the state level that would be something that the county here should be looking at that that you didn't already mention?
Not that the state just did start their funding for training. For years, I was a Brentwood firefighter. That was my living, and a volunteer in the Cheatham County where I lived. But as a career firefighter, I got a $600 supplement if I got my training completed. Now that goes to volunteers as well. So for the first time, the state legislature passed that law a couple of years ago, and it goes into effect this year. If you do your state required training, then volunteers even get the $600, may even be $800 now.
Excellent, excellent. Bill, I thought I'd do just kind of a quick review of what we did last week, and then there were a couple of things that I wanted to talk about that are requirements and related to safety and related to PPE, and just kind of go through those. Chief, did you have something you wanted to add?
Not at this time, Bruce.
Okay, you lit up like you were talking.
I think I coughed.
Bruce, before you get started, how about Doug? How about giving the rest of the group a little bit of thumbnail sketch of your background? I know you're from Florida, but I don't want to make a mistake. You need to unmute your system. There should be a place at the top of your screen where you can unmute it.
Shows he's unmuted.
He had it a while ago.
Yep, he showed unmuted. Nope.
Well, whenever you get it unmuted, Doug, just cut in there. Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay. I'm gonna see if I can bring that program back up. And then we'll minimize this over here. Okay, so this is a continuation from last week, and I was going to just recap a couple of the things we did last week, and that was the. Well, let's see if we can try that again. We had the discussion on what PPE is, and since we're all fire service today, I think last week we had some elected officials, so we tried to go through just exactly what we're talking about for them. And then the cost, and Bill, you asked me to send you that, and I did that. And one of the things that I mentioned is that not included in that cost is a gear bag, and particularly for volunteers, that is a very high importance, because we don't want that gear just being put in the trunk or in the back seat of a car. And I realize that a lot of Tennessee is pickup country, and it would far better be in the bed of the pickup or in a box in the bed of the pickup than in the cab of the pickup. And we'll talk about that just a little bit more. We talked about last week that Tennessee is an OSHA state plan state, which brings into place OSHA as a requirement. And we talked a little bit, and Bill, you talked about it just a little bit, is what constitutes an employee under OSHA is far different than what constitutes an employee under FLSA. So you have pretty well anybody that is working as a firefighter in the state is going to fall under state OSHA. There are some exemptions to that, but that's where you get lawyers involved to make that. And we talked about the general duty clause. Is that really very simple. Each employer shall furnish to each employee a place of employment free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death, serious physical harm to their employees. And when we look at OSHA, PPE is normally recognized as the last line of defense, but in terms of the fire service, when we are going to fires, it is our primary line of defense. So the OSHA Act, Occupational Safety and Health Standards, we talked about the various standards that are typically applied using, and important here is this national consensus standards, because that's going to be our NFPA standards. And OSHA brings the NFPA standards on is vertical standards that are apart. And that's where it's applied to a specific industry. We are under the general industry standard, 29 CFR 1910, the general industry for OSHA. And in particular, when we're engaged in training and non-emergency activities. OSHA is kind of hands-off when we are doing emergency activities, unless we hurt or kill somebody. And then they're going to be absolutely involved. But in the other areas, those aren't a freebie. They will look at us and they will cite us. And then there's NFPA standards. We talked quite a bit about NFPA standards. The fact that they are revised and updated every 3 to 5 years. It takes 2 to 3 years to complete. Shane has been heavily involved in these over the years and may want to jump in here at some point. We talked about the balance that we frequently hear, well, that's made up of manufacturers and they're just shoving stuff down our throat. Well, this paragraph describes how those committees are required to be made up, and no more than 1/3 of any committee can be in the same interest category. So it really is a balanced process, and anybody can participate. Even if you're not a committee member, there are opportunities to participate, and you can use the NFPA website. You have to register to use it, but you don't have to pay to use it. You can also look at any NFPA standard on their website, again, without payment. Now, it won't let you download it. It won't let you print it, but you can go look things up for any NFPA standard without it costing a dime. And then within those standards, of course, we have our product standards, which is NFPA 1971, which is our structural and proximity PPE, NFPA 1975, the hazardous materials suits. All of those are product standards. The standard for SCBA, the standard for pass devices, that describes how the product has to be made and the tests that it has to pass in order to be certified. The others that we look at are user standards, and we're going to talk a little bit about one of those here in just a minute. But probably the best known within the fire service user standard is NFPA 1500, the Fire and Emergency Services Occupational Safety and Health. And then more recently, NFPA 1521 has become a bit better known, predominantly for the incident safety officer, but that's also the standard for the health safety officer and the organization's health safety officer. Important to note that you can use NFPA standards to comply with OSHA, but they can't be used in lieu of OSHA regulations. If there's a conflict between the two, OSHA wins. So another thing that I wanted to talk about today is looking at, and that goes to some of the other things we're going to chat about here, is looking at cancer among U.S. firefighters. And this was done by CDC and NIOSH, and it was published in 2016, where they looked at 30,000 firefighters. Now, these were career firefighters, but the results are applicable across the board when we look at that. And just the highlights from that is looking at firefighters. We showed a higher rate of certain types of cancer than in the general population. And firefighters had a greater number of cancer diagnoses, mostly in digestive, oral, respiratory, and urinary cancers, where the stuff that we get into our body from going to fires is getting flushed out of our body, and it's causing cancer. Mesothelioma, exposure to asbestos. There's still a lot of buildings around with asbestos in them, depending on what part of the country you're in. And we see that exposure is still there. In younger firefighters, they had more bladder and prostate cancers than expected. Prostate cancer extremely high in firefighters. I shouldn't say extremely high. It is high in firefighters. I am a prostate cancer survivor. I personally know about 10 or 12 others that these are people that are friends, people that I've hung out with over the years, that either have gone through or are going through prostate cancer. When I talked to my oncologist about it, he said he wasn't truly aware of it, but he noticed that he saw a lot of firefighters in his practice. So that's one of those that we have to be concerned about. When comparing firefighters in our studies to each other, they saw that lung cancer diagnosis and death increased with the amount of time spent at fires, and the chance of leukemia death increased with the number of fire runs. So people involved in high numbers of runs they were seeing both lung cancer and leukemia in that study. I love Paul Coombs. He's a very, very talented cartoonist. He's a fire instructor, and he is frequently right on. And care of our gear and care of our firefighters is a critical issue. When we look at our PPE in today's fire service, it's broken down. It's comprised of an ensemble, which is consisting of various elements of the ensemble, and then we break that down into components. And although it looks the same in a lot of ways as it did 50, 60 years ago, it is very, very different today than it was then, working to provide us with that envelope of protection. I apologize, I meant to take that slide out of there. Where fire departments are taking care of their gear, there are some very specific requirements for that, and there's specific training that's required as well. And this applies for all of the selection, care, and maintenance documents. There's documents for SCBA. There's still documents being developed as we move through this, but structural firefighting gear was the first one to get a comprehensive selection, care, and maintenance document. And here we get into NFPA and OSHA crossing together, requiring that all the standards that provide for exposure control and protection of members performing the tasks associated with care and maintenance have to be followed. And the new edition of NFPA 1500 goes into this just a bit more, citing the specific roles and responsibilities for inspection, care, and maintenance of protective clothing and equipment, and providing training for taking care of that equipment. The authority having jurisdiction, that would be the county or the individual fire department, has to provide standard operating procedures in order to look at the prevention and mitigation of firefighter exposure to fireground toxic contaminants, and looking at an initial exposure reduction, which used to be called gross decon, is one of the things we'll look at in here in just a minute. The organization has to provide for the cleaning and maintenance. We talked a little bit last week about things that are being done in organizations to see that occurs. And I believe Chief Fugate, I think you talked about what you're doing in your organization, where you have the washer extractors and you have a requirement that they wash the gear and after every fire incident. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
I have an aging memory here.
Yes, we do. We have an extractor, and that is a requirement. The problem with that for a lot of volunteers, though, unless you have two sets of gear, one set's going to be out of service for a while to wash and decontaminate, dry, and put it back together.
Very, very, very true. And there's a variety of ways to look at doing that. There is a requirement of no less than twice a year that's out there as well. Also, training required on appropriate doffing and containment of contaminated protective clothing and equipment, so that we minimize the inhalation of any products that may be on the gear. Preventing that cross contamination, getting it on our other clothing, taking it back to a fire station with us, taking it home with us. All of these are requirements that we have to be concerned with. When we look at all of it, we've got the shower within the hour. There's still, I know, some volunteer stations which don't have shower facilities. That's one of the things that is being built in. I know there's organizations that are building new stations that are doing complete separation so that everything that comes back, when you come back to the station, you're in a whole separate area of the fire station until you come out the other end. You've taken care of your gear, you've showered, and then you're allowed into the rest of the station. But I think we're a long way from seeing that across the nation. Fire personal hygiene, and I'll go back to days that when we were first getting into EMS. I worked at a fire station in Phoenix, and the only deep sink we had in the fire station was the kitchen sink, and we'd come back from an EMS call and we'd wash our ambu bag because we didn't have disposables back then. We'd wash blood off ourselves and all the other crap that was there, and we'd wash that down the sink. We'd kind of wipe the surfaces off with a sponge, and the next thing we're doing is we're cooking lunch on that same surface. And when we think about that today, you go, ooh, wow, why would you ever do that? Well, part of it was we really didn't know much better back then, and so that's come a long ways. Having an exposure reporting system for all of the members to record exposures to fireground contaminants, airborne hazards, dust, or chemicals. Now there's a little bit of good news there. There's also a requirement at least 15 years following the member's separation or until the death of a member, whichever occurs first. There are some situations where those documents are required to be kept for 30 years. Let me get out of the full screen here. I'm going to jump down just a little bit because I think this fits better here than where I had it. This is kind of the good news, is firefighter exposure tracking. In order to do what I was just talking about is really easy. This is done by IPSDI company, but the app is free. It is 100% free, and firefighters can track their own individual exposures, their own responses, and they've just added a disaster deployment module to that for people that wind up getting involved in disaster deployment. So that's one that is just really good, and there's not a lot of really good free stuff out there, but that does help us with the record keeping system that is required here, and again, no cost whatsoever. NFPA 1851, which is a user standard. It's one of those that would be applied by OSHA. It's specific to structural and proximity firefighting ensembles, and it's the selection, care, and maintenance. Use is covered by NFPA 1500. So it talks about the cleaning and storage. It talks about the maintenance issues. It talks about all of the things that we need to do to properly care for firefighting gear. And it requires that we have a program. One of those things within that program, of course, is looking at the fact that our gear is suitable for the intended use. And that's really not terribly hard to do, but important that we look at that as an organization. It talks about maintaining our calls. Shane, can I ask you to jump in here for just a minute? And I'm going to take this call real quick. We've been playing tag, so if you'll jump in, I'll mute myself, and we'll continue on.
Yep, perfect. Got it. Well, Chief Varner's been over again, a lot of things and the things we require. And it sounds like you all are ahead in the area that you would require, you know, that some of you already have an extractor so that you could go wash your gear. That's good progress. So I'd just like to open it up now and see what kind of questions we could answer between what we've covered from the start and now. So.
Well, I'd like to throw this first item out for discussion, is that to the best of my knowledge, the county and the individual fire departments and the association have not officially adopted any of the NFPA standards. Am I correct on that, Chief Fugate? I see you're lit up, Chief Fugate. We're not hearing Chief Fugate, but to the best of my knowledge, Shane, that the county has not adopted any of the NFPA standards. And I'm not aware of anything in the association where the association may have done that. Now we've got another Chief Fugate listed here and muted. I think that might be Michael Yates from over in Kentucky. Chief Ray, are you aware of any of did Cheatham County adopt any NFPA standards?
We did not. We adopted the building codes and those kind of things, but we didn't adopt any of the volunteer consensus standards. So,
Tony, are you on?
Yeah, I'm back on, Bill. I'm having some trouble with my internet connection for some reason. It's saying it's unstable. That's the reason I didn't answer the question there.
Am I correct that the county or the individual fire departments have not adopted any of the standards, NFPA standards?
Well, no, Bill, there's no one in Hawkins County. Half of them don't even know what they are.
Now, I do know that we abide by the standards when we get into procurement, whether we're writing a grant for a vehicle or procuring clothing, but to actually come out and say that we have never officially adopted anything in legislation or resolution. Back to
Yeah,
you.
you're correct, Bill. There's nothing been adopted in Hawkins County, and you know that I've tried to get across to them, whether you adopt them or not, that's the consensus standard you're going to be held to, pretty much. You're
Right.
called into a court of law and they bring in an expert witness, they're going to be citing NFPA standards as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely, they are. I see Shane starting to say something there. Go ahead, Shane.
I was just going to jump in and say I dealt with this in my life in South Carolina. So after the Charleston Sofa Superstore fire, a couple of years after that, I went to South Carolina to try to help out as their superintendent of their fire academy. And because we were in OSHA state and OSHA was within the Department of Labor licensing and regulation, OSHA is going to be one of the first ones to utilize some of these to try to make you get into compliance. Now, unfortunately, it took a tragedy like that occurred in Charleston to wake most of that up, but we don't ever want to be on the back end of that thing. So the more things we can do progressive, the better off you'll be, because all you got to do is look at those places where tragedy occurred, and it's like nobody ever wants to face that. But most places don't feel those things as a threat. So we just did the best we could do. We tried, like you said, if you bought the fire truck, it came compliant. And we also tried to use NFPA 1720 for how we deployed and some of those things. And again, we did the best we could with what we had, but we did have a plan for it.
I think that, you know, that when you look at that, and that was part of what I was talking about in being an OSHA state, is if OSHA comes in for whatever reason, they are going to bring all of those NFPA standards with them. I don't get as many as I used to, but I probably get at least one call a month now from an attorney who is looking for a fire expert to testify. I don't testify if it's against a fire department or against a firefighter, which means that of all the attorneys that have ever called me, I've found one that I was able to, in good conscience, take on. And I generally give them the name of a couple of people that I know that will do that, that are retired fire chiefs. And they are more than happy to testify against a fire department or against a firefighter. That's just what they do. We have a difference of opinion in that. But one of the more recent ones is I had gotten a call from the attorney. I turned him down, gave him somebody's name. He says, I've already talked to him. He turned me down. About 2 weeks later, there was a firm that was searching that called again, same deal. But they are out there. In New York State, it's been several years ago, we had a chief officer who actually went to jail for not being in compliance. And one of the things that occurred is the judge asked him about NFPA, and this happened to be the NFPA live training burn standard, NFPA 1403. And he said, I've never heard of that. He said, but you're a fire chief. That means you should have, and you had the requirement that you should have known this. And so you can't say, I didn't know it, or we didn't adopt it to get out of it. And certainly Chief Fugate knows this. Doug probably knows this as well. Michael, I missed your introduction, so but these are things that are really important at making sure our elected officials understand that if we're not doing these things, if we're not meeting the standard of care, that we're hanging out. Our butts are hanging out in the wind. And I think that's the important aspect of that is that we understand that yes, dollars are limited. Can we show in good faith that we're aware of it and we're taking the steps that we have within our ability to meet those requirements? And while we may not meet all of them to the letter, we've shown a good faith effort, and that goes a long ways too towards keeping people out of trouble. A hush falls over the crowd.
Mike, you have anything to add?
No, sir. No, I just got in here. My internet's giving me a fit, so I'm just trying to get caught up with you here and listen, see what's going on.
Michael, introduce yourself and tell the rest of the panel your background, please, where you're located.
I'm located in London, Kentucky. I've been an active volunteer for 34 years, and my biggest task is keeping Chief Killen in line. So I'm originally from Churchill, Tennessee. I'm on duty at the City of Somerset Fire Department tonight, and I'm a state fire rescue instructor for the state of Kentucky. So.
Thank you, Michael, and welcome. I was going to just kind of clip through the rest of these slides. Bill, you may notice that these slides look a little different than the other slides, and I had some things going on and didn't have the opportunity to kind of make them all look pretty. But these are actually out of a program on personal protective equipment selection, care, and maintenance that is all about 1851. In its entirety, it's a 3-day program, and it includes hands-on, and mostly I deliver this to the military, to the Air Force. But so these slides are actually ones that I lifted out of that program. So we're doing in 20 minutes, we're doing a quick overview of a 3-day program. So I apologize that we're kind of hitting some stuff quick and maybe without all the context that we would like to have, but I did want to mention where the bulk of these slides that are all in blue came from.
Well, that's perfectly okay, Bruce. I think we're accomplishing the intent, and particularly if we're able to get some of the elected officials who were not able to participate to look at this on YouTube. Doug, did you ever get your situation where you can talk? Okay.
No.
Yeah.
We heard you, Doug.
Did you? Okay.
Whatever you did is working.
Well, Doug, go ahead and introduce yourself and your background for the panel, please.
I'm retired firefighter paramedic from the city of Clearwater, Florida. 24 years between Clearwater, Florida and Okeechobee County, Florida. I've got a vast experience between the rural county firefighting and then obviously the big city firefighting. Within Clearwater, I was a USAR team member, certified USAR, also got some experience with hazmat, and then was a fireboat captain and served in the station 44 and 46 for 6 years in Clearwater, manning the fireboat and the beach stations. Also was a driver and operator for city of Clearwater the last 3 years.
I always wanted to be a fireboat captain, but in Phoenix, we just didn't have enough water.
Well, I believe if you'd had enough water, Brunacini would have had a fireboat.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, indeed. There's been a couple of times when we had plenty of water, but it was very episodic and very short-lived. So kind of continuing on, and this is the elements of that program, and this is that continuation from last week is, you know, we have to have the clothing, but we've also got to take care of it. And there's things that we have to do in taking care of it that we have to document and be sure that we're doing that. And you know, certainly in a large paid organization, they will have requirements to do this. They'll have people that do this, and it becomes a lot harder within the volunteer organizations. I had the opportunity to chat very briefly, unfortunately, very briefly, with the lady that's now the executive director for the National Volunteer Fire Council. And one of the things that we talked about was, is there things that where we can help one another, wearing my IFE hat. So that's one of those where, you know, maybe we can provide some discourse that proves to be helpful there. And certainly National Volunteer Fire Council puts out a lot of information, a lot of material, and is standing in Washington. And this was at the Congressional Fire Services Institute reception the other night that we were chatting. So they represent very well the volunteer fire services. And as Shane talked about earlier, a lot of the money that's been in the grants programs has gone to volunteer departments.
Yeah, I'm a member of the Volunteer Fire Council, the National Volunteer Group, and I forward the information I get from them. I forward that on to all the association members. Sometimes I forget to do it, but I'm not sure how many of our fire department members are a member of the National Volunteer Group. But it's a great organization. They provide a lot of information and a lot of services.
So continuing on, routine inspections, which is the firefighters themselves inspecting their own gear. And again, a checklist helps us a lot, is looking at what are the elements of a routine inspection, so that they can go through that. They check that off, they sign their name to it, and you have a record of that routine inspection being done. Preliminary exposure reduction. What we're talking about here is washing down and taking the gear off in a manner that reduces any exposure to fireground contaminants to the individual. And that's being properly trained, setting up a preliminary exposure zone, reduction zone. And it's important that if you use the pump operator, or if you use auxiliary members, that they be properly protected when doing this. Early on, we saw a lot of folks where they didn't have any respiratory protection on whatsoever. They didn't have gloves on, and they're washing down and assisting the firefighter getting out of the gear. Well, they're being exposed to those fireground contaminants. And so being done properly. Builders, I will send you a couple of videos. I apologize, I don't have them in this program tonight, and I don't think we really had the time to go into them, that are really simple videos looking at preliminary exposure reduction, and certainly hard hitting. I think the biggest thing is when we take care of our gear and get ourselves clean, it keeps us from taking this crap home and exposing our families. And that's the one that we just really don't want to be doing. When we look at the fires we go to today, when we look at the content of those fires compared to what we were going to 40, 50 years ago, even 30 years ago, there is some RBS, that's really bad stuff, or there's another word for that S in there, that we're being exposed to, that's getting on our gear, that if we're not doing it properly, we're taking it back to the station. It's where we're seeing the increase in firefighter cancers. It's where we're seeing families that are exposed. Earlier, we mentioned asbestos exposures. Asbestos exposure, you take those fibers home, that can result in certainly problems for any of your family, for your children, for your spouse. So we really want to be very, very careful that we're not taking things home. It's immediately after exiting at any incident where their protective ensemble or the elements could have been soiled or contaminated. And I think it's important. We go on a smells and bells. We go on a smoke detector call where food on the stove has set off the smoke detector, and we don't have a fire. We haven't involved components that are in the house. We haven't involved the structure. You don't have to do that for those. And I think it's really important that we understand that, because we can result in overkill. And just as Chief Fugate said, the gear's out of service when you completely wash it. So yeah, I think it's understanding and doing it appropriately, and educating our folks to do it appropriately are the really important things.
Bruce, something just hit me right between the eyes here. A couple of things. One, I was sitting here and reminiscing and thinking back to my days at the Space Center. But something I've not heard anything said about. We're responding to these fires. We're getting there and we're doing all these things, and we're getting contaminated. And we climb back into the rig and we drive back to the fire station. I haven't seen or heard anything at all about decontamination of the rig where we sat.
Well, if we don't take our gear into the cab with us, we're not going to contaminate those spaces.
But a lot of the times the gear is worn in the cab, or they climb back up in the cab
Absolutely. And the same applies. You've got to decontaminate the cab. You've got to wash it. If you look at any of the fire trucks, not that many of us have gone to any trade shows lately, but any of the fire trucks that are at any trade show, local, regional, One of the things they're talking about today is the ability to decontaminate the seats, the surfaces within the cab. The manufacturers are on top of that based on the requirements and based on what we're seeing. But we shouldn't be climbing back into the cab with gear that's been contaminated. It should be bagged and transported separately from the cab. Keep it out of the cab. Reduce those exposures. Again, I'm going to send you a couple of videos you can utilize for that. And there's a Swedish model which can cause people to here in the U.S. to go absolutely crazy, calls the Skelefla model, and that has you taking all of your gear off, bagging it, changing into a coverall before you get back into the apparatus, and then when you get back to the station, cleaning all that gear, getting it ready for the next run. When I mentioned it as being a Swedish model, the Swedish fire service is predominantly volunteer fire service. So it's not, this is not a career thing. This is a culture within Sweden where they have moved to reduce that fireground contamination. Shane, you're familiar with that one, aren't you?
Yes, sir. And I was going to say, in a practical means in Tennessee, our groups tried to, if they do have a working fire where they have significant contamination, then they just try to send a pickup to pick up the hose, pick up the gear, take it back and get it in the proper washing and proper areas so that the firefighters, and again, they hose them down at the scene. I was just in Florida last week, down outside Orlando in Reedy Creek. We did a burn down there, and again, they wash them off really good before they weren't directly involved in smoke. So they just literally stand out there and wash them off to try to decon there on site. So there's many things you can do that don't go to the, extreme that some places do to get started in this program. The key is, do you make that attempt? Do you have a place you come back and wash? Do you have a means to get it back? And usually when we send the pickup truck out we just try to bring spare gear with them so that the firefighters have gear when they're going back. So there's many things to do to try to, be practical, not cost a ton of money. But the key is just put it down in writing and some simple sketches and try to get your people trained up on it. That's a key.
Thanks, Shane. And it's really an important key.
Yeah, I was.
Go ahead,
Please go
Mike.
ahead.
I was wanting to chime in on this right here. There's an agency here that I work around real close. They went to the clean cab, and honestly, I've tried wrapping my head around this concept, and I can't comprehend it. So basically, they respond to a fire, they're out of service. They send their gear back in like a pickup truck, like Shane was talking about there. They send a pickup truck and a trailer out and pick up all the hose, their SCBAs that was used, their gear, and everything. And the only thing that rides back in the engine is the fireman. And I'm real big into the cancer program that we teach here in the state of Kentucky. And but once you take all this out of the truck and the second call comes in, now what are we faced with? I mean, I'm not bought into this send your gear back because we're running multiple calls in a shift, and even at the volunteer department, we're running 3 and 4 a day, and having a couple of structures in the same day is not out of the ordinary. But if you're sending your gear back, I think it's just
Our department, Mike, runs about 3,000 calls a year with predominant volunteer response. And like I said, if we're going to do that, then we send the spare gear out. So the fire truck doesn't go back empty with just people in civilian clothes. They've got gear before they go back. So we have to keep engines in service. So we just take spare gear with us when we go.
right.
Michael,
Shane,
the other way to do that is,
There's agencies out here that's taken this.
go ahead, sir.
There's agencies out here that's taken this. In my opinion, they've taken it the wrong way, and like Shane's talking there, if you're able to, and you've got the means to have them extra gear out there, but whenever we teach live fire training, anything that's involving any Class A materials, we set up a decon station, and just as soon as they come out, they go straight to decon, and they get washed at all of our training. And you know, I'm agreeing with this, and I preach all the time about the departments that washes the outside of the trucks, but they never wash the inside of the trucks.
Yeah.
Michael, when I mentioned that Skellefteå model, the Swedish model, here in the US, there's a number of fire departments that are now carrying heavy plastic bags. And what they will do is they'll come out of their gear and they'll put their gear in the bag. They'll gooseneck it, and they'll take a wrap of tape, and it goes back in the hose bed, or it goes back in a compartment, but it's with them. And if they get another response, yes, it's going to take just a moment longer to get that gear back out and put it on to go, but they have the ability to do that. And I would never, I was a guy, and Shane knows stuff about me that he shouldn't, and he can't prove because there were no cameras back then. But I would never bought into being in a position where we could not respond at all because our gear was separate from us. No, I couldn't have dealt with that when I was riding a fire truck, which has been a long time ago. And I had a reputation for if I was closer, I would take the call. It's one of those that I agree with you that being completely out of service and having no ability to deliver service isn't the solution, but there are solutions out there that enable us to not get that gear in the cab, not contaminate the cab, but still be in a position where we can deliver service.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
So one of the things, the question that comes back, we all assume risk and take risks, but what is the risk of where we don't have the money for gear, of maintaining gear that may be out of the NFPA cycle that's still in good shape that we could use as backup gear? What's the risk with doing that?
Well, the risk is you're in violation of the NFPA standard, which technically puts you in a position to be in violation of OSHA. It's like Chief Bernasini said when a guy was taking exception to some of the things in 1500. He says, how do you write an unsafe safety standard? So for me to answer that question, I can't answer and say, oh, it's okay. I think there are circumstances where you're faced with, you do what you have to do with what you have, but understand that you are rolling the dice, and you are in fact out of compliance.
Although one of my favorite heroes, who's long gone from this earth, used to say sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness than it is permission, but OSHA does not forgive. And today in a conversation with a Stafford County, Virginia fire chief, I was asking about surplus equipment, and all of their PPE was sent to a manufacturer that recycles it into gear bags so that they could not use it for firefighting equipment. But it's a two-edged sword. and if you do the right thing for the right reasons, generally you can't go too far astray for that.
Oh, Bill, one of the places that I won't say that, I hate to say that OSHA's looked the other way. I think they have looked at it from a practicality and a cost-effective standpoint, is that in training situations, and I know Phoenix used to do this. I know a number of other larger agencies used to do it. They would take gear that had been removed from service, and for the physical training activities of learning how to load hose, pull hose, all of those things, they wore that gear. Before they ever went into the first live fire, they were issued their permanent gear, and they were trained on that gear once again. There was initial training when they came through the door, but there was a training that was going through the manufacturer's requirements for maintaining the gear, how it's supposed to be cleaned. And from that point forward, that was the gear they wore, but they were actually wearing out gear, crawling on the concrete, doing the things that they do that did not involve any kind of fire activity. So that's one where people have utilized gear that is no longer considered serviceable to do those types of things, and provide a cost savings on, because gear is expensive. There's no two ways about it. And tearing it up, learning how to pull and drag hose is one of those where I know a lot of departments have been able to do that.
We do the same thing, Chief Varner. We issue our recruits gear when they come in, may not be the best or may not be the nicest or those kind of things. But before we put them in live fire, they've got their regular issued gear. The other thing I can't speak for Tennessee OSHA, but I would say for South Carolina's OSHA is we would try to work with you. There was no day that our OSHA inspectors or teams ever went out and said, we're here as a hatchet. Normally it was because of a complaint. So we would try to work with anybody that was trying to, quote, do the right thing and use common sense. But I would say this, common sense has to make sense. And it has to make sense to more people than just yourself. So always remember that. And I think as long as you're trying to do the right thing, you have some sort of written training plan that, again, don't have to be a book, but it does have to have something that says we've thought through this, we've documented it, and we're doing our best to execute it.
Well said, sir.
Bruce, we are over the 1 hour mark, and I really appreciate your participation and contributions for these two sessions. And Shane, I really appreciate yours. And what I would like to do is do a round robin and let everybody have an opportunity to make any closing comments or ask any questions. And I'm going to begin with Chief Fugate, if he would. Chief Fugate.
Bill, I don't know if y'all can hear me or not, but I'm still having trouble with connection here. It's actually dropped me a couple of times and I've had to log back in. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you and see you.
Oh, okay, good deal. I can't see you guys, but that's great. No, I appreciate Bruce and Shane both coming on tonight. It's been very informative. I hope the recording gets out and you get it on YouTube so some of the other folks in the county here can watch it.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Mike Yates.
You're muted, Mike.
He's trying to find a place on the screen to unmute. Well,
I'm
he's
trying, Chief. I'm like, Tony must be trying to steal my internet. So it's I'm having a heck of a time trying to stay on as well. hate I didn't get in on it at the beginning, but a lot of good information and a lot of stuff that still needs to be passed on and worked out, and a couple different things. Good to see Shane again. It's been a few years, but I look forward to being in on the next one.
Thank you, Mike. Doug, anything you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody for allowing me in this conversation, and a lot of good information. Definitely being in a big city, we hit on a lot of the points for the firefighters with cancer and everything. A lot of times we came out of fires, we decontaminated, they took our gear. They actually sent us back to the station to get showered up and get a new change of clothes before they let us put our new gear back onto the truck or the engine. So, we were very blessed and fortunate enough to have a lot of stations around, so we were able to do that. One thing I stressed in my class last week about firefighter gear was one of the young men has stated that he keeps his bunker gear underneath his bed at home, and I politely informed him about the concerns about cancer and carcinogens on the gear. So I think it's, getting this information out to even the volunteers that carry their gear in their car, not properly basically covered up in bags and everything. They go in fires and they really don't take care of their gear after being in fires or certain situations, even medical calls.
Chief Shane Ray.
I always used to say that if you want to think what you're looking like is cool, back in the day when we used to have everything all black and stuff, it's like cool that way equals cancer. Today, clean is cool. If you want to be cool, that shows you're smarter than the average bear. I never thought I would see my little old volunteer fire company with a separate turnout gear room for their firefighters, with not wearing their gear in the station and those kind of things. So we've come a long way, and it didn't cost a lot of money. And one of the things that I used to always say to our county commissioners, and we were blessed and are still blessed with a county commission who supports our volunteer fire service. The one thing they knew then was, if all these boys and girls are working for free, the least we could do is provide them the resources. And we showed them through that plan that said, look, because we work for free, here's how much money we save you. And because that we do that, the least we could do is provide them the decent equipment and the means to have some funding. And I think Cheatham County has led the way. So we would personally invite you. I happen to be sitting in Maryland, not in Cheatham County, but I was back there since COVID. And I'm sure those men and women that run that fire service there and our county commissioners would welcome a field trip from anybody from Hawkins County to travel to Cheatham County to come and visit and see how they do that. It's worked real well. It's not broke the bank. There's nobody in that county that hates taxes more than my father. And so he's still surviving and still running and he's not even in the fire service. So we would welcome anybody to try to come and see what they're doing in that little county. It's very progressive. And I just want to say thank you to you all as my friends for having me here. It's good to spend time with you.
Thank you, Shane. Bruce, I'm going to let you have the last word after I make a comment, but I want to thank each one of you for participating in your contributions. But more importantly, I want to thank each of you for your friendship and your love. Bruce, you have the last word.
Thank you, sir. For all of you, thank you very much for listening to me. I hope it made some sense. And I know there's a lot of material, particularly the regulatory stuff, that it's not real interesting, but it is real important. And Shane, man, I get to see you twice in 4 days, and I haven't seen you in months. So it's good to see you, sir. Bill, thank you for providing us with that opportunity. And if I can help in any way, you know how to find me, and greatly appreciate you, sir. And I will clean up these slides a little bit and add those videos, and then I'll send them your way. Probably be tomorrow afternoon before I get that done.
Thank you so much. Gentlemen, I'm going to stop the recording, and when we hit the button, we'll end the conversation. As soon as I can get it uploaded on YouTube, I'll do that, and I'll send the you the link to it. Thank you, gentlemen. God bless you and have a good evening and have a good weekend. Oh, tomorrow morning at 7:30, thanks to the National Fire Sprinkler Association on the Lifetime channel, there'll be an old fogey with driving a fire truck. So good night, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night, sir. Take care. Bye-bye.